is Helen Caldecott. Many more of you may have heard of her. She's deservedly famous, a good friend. She sponsored a conference 2.5 years ago, on energy. And Dave and I were there, and Dave made what I thought as an engineer was a shocking speech. He said we should get rid of coal, and we should get rid of oil, and we should get rid of nuclear, and we should go solar. And I went up to him and I said, Dave, you're going to send every industry we have left to China, because this is not sensible. It's going to be so expensive to do this. And Helen said the planet is in intensive care, which it is. The black line is actual measurements of Arctic melting, and the other lines are all models. And the models are wrong, but not in the way the climate deniers think. The reality is much worse than the models. So the worst case Arctic ice melting may happen in 3, 5, or 10 years. So until the year before last, the models are looking pretty good, and then last year something happened, and we don't quite know what, but maybe some tipping point. We're not sure yet. It's not going to announce itself very easily, unlike the ozone layer. But it doesn't look good, and this year also it doesn't look good. We really have 3 different energy problems, or we used to have 3 different energy problems until Washington got involved, and now we have 4 different energy problems. And we had a climate problem with CO2 and fossil fuels, and even Alan Greenspan has said the war in Iraq is largely about oil. Then we've got a nuclear proliferation-related energy problem with nuclear energy. And then there were these corn to ethanol mandates. I know I won't be very popular in Iowa by saying it's not sensible to turn fuel into food and then food into fuel. The founding intellectual document of this country was called Common Sense. And I think turning fuel into food and food into fuel violates common sense. It also doesn't make much sense by the second law of thermodynamics, which Einstein thought would last almost as long as God. But there's a huge overlap between proliferation and nuclear power. I just want to read this one quote from Oppenheimer about a nuclear disarmament convention. He said, if we signed such a convention, we would not make atomic weapons, at least not to start with, but we would build enormous plants, and we would call them power plants, and maybe they would produce power. We would design these plants in such a way that they could be converted with the maximum ease and the minimum time delay to the production of atomic weapons, saying this is just in case somebody 2 times us. Then there's the problem of nuclear waste. And the government said we're going to put it under Yucca Mountain. They say nuclear energy is clean, and you have 250 million tons of mine waste and 250 million tons of mill tailings, and 10 to 20 million gallons of water per reactor per day. And the one on the right is depleted uranium. We've got about 750,000 tons of depleted uranium in the form of uranium hexafluoride sitting in rustic cylinders, some of them. And they send some of the plutonium to Japan. And Ichiro Ozawa, who's one of the leaders of their political party, said in 2002 something to the effect that if China gets too uppity, we should use our commercial nuclear assets to make thousands of nuclear weapons. And in my estimation, Japan can go from 0 to a full-fledged nuclear weapon state in 6 months. And that opinion, by the way, Herbert York, the first director of Lawrence Livermore Lab, agreed with me on that in a formal interview. They discharge 100 million gallons of liquid radioactive wastes into the English Channel every year, and they've polluted the oceans all the way to the Arctic. And 12 out of 15 Western European governments, not just Greenpeace, that's the discharge pipe at the bottom, have said, please stop. And the French won't, the French are polluting the English Channel, the English are polluting the Irish Sea, and everything's all right. With all this, if nuclear power were really cheap, the climate crisis is so serious that one would say, well, you could leave it on the table. It would not be very good, but there'd be a much stronger argument for it. Now, you've got a situation, there was a time before this immediate crisis, or before 2007, where Wall Street considered subprime mortgages as securities. Well, now they're known to be insecurities, but they were known as securities at the time. That Wall Street did not want to finance new nuclear power plants. So from that we may assess, perhaps, the risk of investments in nuclear power plants best, and they still won't finance nuclear power plants, and so the people who want to build them say they want loan guarantees from the government. I think the government is a little bit maxed out in that department the last time I looked at the papers. Gregory Yasko, the commissioner of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, said that it could take about $500 billion of loan guarantees to deliver a nuclear renaissance. And I don't think anybody wants that baby. At least I don't. You don't want to do a $20 billion project that won't start delivering any cash to you for 10 years. This is just folly. And one of my suggestions for mayors, local governments, states, because Washington is not in the leadership of this, if you haven't noticed already, is that you could set up utilities. Now, earlier I heard your discussion that you have transmission connection difficulties. You could set up a city utility that issues bonds to do efficiency, and do like the city of Berkeley or do some other thing. Finance the thing with municipally issued bonds, and then put the cost of the loan into the tax bill so that it's portable to the house, and the person occupying the house is not liable for the loan. The person who owns the house at all times. So if it gets sold, it's portable with the house and not with the owner house. We can eliminate 85% of the energy footprint of homes with sensible buildings, and the reason developers don't do it is they'd rather sell you the granite counter and you take your chances with the extra radiation from the granite counter. Or not, some granite has a fair amount, some doesn't. I would not personally install granite counters, but that's, you know. You fall in love with the azaleas and the cherry blossoms and the wooden floors and the light in the kitchen and the backyard and the front yard. That's what we did. And then you worry about the energy bill. So there have to be, that's another thing I think local governments can do. Maybe it's counties and not cities. You have the right kind of building codes. You have the right kind of incentives. You roll in the energy bill. You advise people who issue mortgages to roll in the energy bill into consideration of whether people can pay mortgage interest and taxes. It should really be the principal interest, taxes, and energy bills, because that's what you have to pay every month to stay in your house. The United States is often thought of as having as much wind energy as Saudi Arabia. That's wrong. The wind energy belt just here in the Midwest and Rocky Mountain states is about equivalent to all the oil production of all the OPEC countries put together, with due apologies to the second law of thermodynamics, approximate comparison. So solar energy is even more plentiful than wind. 100 miles by 100 miles in the Southwest could supply all of the electricity generation of the United States. We can solve the problem of intermittency with available technology. You can go from the 1% renewable we are in the electricity sector nationally to 30, 40%, simply using existing technology and the head, the brain. You coordinate sun and wind. You do microalgae. One of the things you could do in cities is you could grow aquatic weeds and wastewater, clean up the wastewater, get the nitrogen and other nutrients out of wastewater, and grow fuel. And that's where the fertilizer for the biomass comes from. You can dry out the biomass and co-fire it with coal, reduce your coal consumption. That has been tried out successfully, small percentages. But with gasification plants, you could gasify biomass and use higher and higher percentages of biomass and go to renewable baseload generation.